Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin, and on this channel I upload all types of videos revolving around true crime, education and psychology related topics. And welcome back to another installment of True Crime Week. If you haven't already watched some of my videos this week, I'm uploading every single day this week a different true crime case, solved and unsolved. They're a mixture of everything, so definitely set your notifications if you haven't already so you don't miss an upload this week. For today's video we're going to be discussing the case of the murder of KATHRYN Bishop, and the reason this case is sort of so widely discussed even now years after it happened is because there's a huge argument as to whether the man that was convicted as being responsible for her murder is actually responsible, or whether it was a complete miscarriage of justice and a wrongful conviction. So once you've watched this video, I'd love to know your guys' thoughts in the comments below as to whether you think the person convicted was actually guilty or whether there was someone else to blame. I'd love to know your thoughts. And before we get started, I'm just going to whiz through my usual disclaimer that I like to include at the start of all my videos, just letting you guys know that I'm not claiming to be an expert in this case or any of the other cases that I cover over on my channel. I am simply relaying the information I'm able to find myself through research of certain sources on the internet, and because only certain sources are accessible to me, it means I may get things wrong, leave things out or mispronounce things, and I apologise if I do any of those things. I'm not trying to cause anyone any harm or an injustice. I'm simply working with the information that I have available to me. So with all that being said, we should just go ahead and get started discussing the case of KATHRYN Bishop. KATHRYN Irene Bishop was born on the 21st of November in the year of 1910 in a place called Harrisburg in Dauphin County in Pennsylvania. Because of when this case occurred, I couldn't really find a lot of detail regarding to the early life of KATHRYN Bishop, but it is known that on the 12th of August in 1937, she married a man named Charles Ellis Thomas Bishop in Harrisburg. At the time of her death in 1993, KATHRYN was 82 years old and living in a place called Hummelstown in Pennsylvania. On March the 4th of 1993, KATHRYN Bishop was found in her home, brutally beaten to death at some point between 9 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. the previous evening. It had been determined that her attacker had stomped on her over 60 times in the particularly brutal attack, and responding authorities found the window of the kitchen door in the home had actually been broken, as well as the window in the basement being open. There was a tumble dryer located beneath the window in the basement, and the top of it had a number of dark scuff marks, giving them the impression that someone had used it to stand on, either as a point of entry or exit to the home. It was later determined that there was a lot of cash in the home. KATHRYN Bishop was an 82-year-old woman at the time of her death, and it's known that she preferred to save up money in cash, and so investigators were later able to determine that a total of around $6,000 in cash was also stolen from the possessions of KATHRYN. Allegedly, police had also discovered a word puzzle and a broken pen in the area of the body, as well as a receipt from the company Ace American Chimney Experts. And when the news spread of the brutal attack on the elderly woman, the entire local community was shocked and outraged, and for many people it just begged the question of why. One of the potential persons of interest in the investigation had been a man who had been working as an oil company driver, mainly due to the fact that he had been scheduled to make a visit or a delivery at KATHRYN's home on the day that she was killed. But this didn't go much further, as he was later able to produce a strong alibi when the investigators had questioned him. At the time of the murder, the Bishop family home had two men employed to clean the chimney in the house, and these two men's names were Timothy McEnany and his cousin Andrew Reichman. The outcry from the local community had driven authorities to want to find some answers and to be able to find a culprit quickly, because so many people were absolutely outraged at the news of her death, and as a result the pair of chimney cleaners were called in for questioning immediately. During questioning, Timothy McEnany had told authorities that he had been in fact in the house on the day of her murder, but he told them that during the evening he hadn't been in the home as he decided to go to a bar that was around 15 miles away from KATHRYN Bishop's house, and according to him this is where he remained until around 1:30 a.m. the following morning. This claim of Timothy's was partially supported by a report that was given by a cook working in the bar that same night, and he had said that he did recall seeing him in the bar, but this had been at around 6 p.m. and he didn't recall seeing him any later past this point. And a bartender working in the bar that night had told the authorities that he did remember seeing Timothy in the bar at around midnight, but he had allegedly told them that he remembers thinking the man was acting in a way that suggested he wanted everyone inside the bar to take note of his presence, to be aware that he was there. In a report given by the neighbours of KATHRYN Bishop, they claimed that they'd heard a loud crash at approximately 10 p.m. on the night of KATHRYN's murder. When they looked out of their window in search of the source of the noise, they'd seen a man running down the road away from KATHRYN Bishop's house. And when the neighbours had provided a description of the man they'd seen running down the street, it had allegedly matched that of Andrew Reichman, one of the chimney cleaners. This, combined with the alleged forensic evidence of Reichman and McEnany being inside the Bishop home that day, led the investigators to believe that they were the perpetrators of the brutal crime. And even though McEnany had provided investigators with his alibi for the time in which KATHRYN was killed, he was arrested and charged with robbery, burglary, criminal homicide and criminal conspiracy, while Andrew Reichman didn't actually face any charges in relation to the case. And over the years there has just been much controversy surrounding this case regarding the alleged guilt of Timothy McEnany. The Pennsylvania Justice Project are at the forefront of proving the innocence and seeking justice for the imprisonment of Timothy McEnany, something they believe is a gross miscarriage of justice. During the trial of McEnany, one specific scenario was offered with slightly different outcomes from the two opposing perspectives. The prosecution had proposed a scenario in which both of the chimney sweeps had gone to Shane's flight deck, which was the bar, the evening of KATHRYN's death, where they then decided to go back to the client's house in an attempt to rob it. The scenario goes that the pair would head back to the home and be back at the bar before anyone would even notice they'd gone, in order for them to have a strong alibi. But they suggested that when they had arrived at KATHRYN's home, they unexpectedly found her awake, which is where they panicked and beat her to death before stealing the large sum of money. And following this, they then headed back to the bar before going to Atlantic City to spend what they'd stolen. But according to some sources I read, McEnany had argued this scenario in court by stating that he hadn't left the bar at any point. Although I think a lot of doubt in McEnany had been rooted in this claim of his, as there had been seemingly multiple people who at this point in the night just hadn't seen him in the bar. What I do think is interesting to consider with this though is just how reliable eyewitness testimonies are. So if you were to think about being inside a bar, inside a busy bar, and everyone that you'd come across, you wouldn't be likely to remember exactly everyone who was there and exactly when they'd left, if they'd gone and come back at every point in the night. And because of this, I think a lot of people think that there is a significant amount of reasonable doubt in this part of the trial. According to the more recent investigation put forward by the Pennsylvania Justice Project, a man named Father Salvato, heavily involved in this quest for justice, and McEnany's mother, whose name was Janet, have claimed that they believe the police at this time should have investigated KATHRYN Bishop's grandson, a man named Greg Seitz, in relation to the crime. According to the posts written on this website, KATHRYN's daughter and mother of Greg had visited KATHRYN in her home a number of times in the company of her husband, while both of the chimney cleaners had been working in the home. And according to McEnany, when he had met the couple, Janet had been particularly unsure. She'd been very noticeably unsettled by their presence, despite her husband being particularly friendly to them. And in more recent years following the murder, Janet Seitz, who was KATHRYN's daughter, had publicly stated that she had felt uneasy at the time, as the pair had been charging somewhere between $300 and $400 for their work, an amount that she claimed seemed unusually high. But this claim of the pair possibly overcharging the elderly woman for their services has been disputed by many people, since the pair had not only been cleaning the chimney, but they'd also allegedly been repairing a part of it, and so it just seems to a lot of people that this price was justified. And in the months and years following the murder of KATHRYN Bishop, the media coverage only seemed to grow. According to the McEnany family though, it started to get rather unpleasant for them, and they began to feel as though they were best off not agreeing to be involved in any media reports and interviews, as they were kind of fearful of bias and public outcry. And due to the family refusing to feature on a number of media reports written and shown about the case, a Forensic Files episode had aired covering the case, featuring an investigative journalist who had allegedly gotten a number of the details wrong. Posts on the Pennsylvania Justice Project website do explore a number of other avenues that may have contributed to what they believe to have been the unfair sentencing of Timothy McEnany, including the responding police having mishandled the crime scene and handled the entire follow-up investigation poorly. The website is really detailed, and I definitely think it's worth a read if you'd like to look into some of the arguments that they make in favour of Timothy's innocence. A number of details in this case are constantly argued, and it can be hard to sort of narrow down what the actual facts are. So for example, during the trial of McEnany, the prosecution stated that the authorities claimed they found evidence of him having phoned up KATHRYN's home on the evening of her murder, suggesting that he'd done so to check to see if she was at home or awake. But this was argued by many as being fabricated evidence caused by the police's drastic need to solve the case quickly. It had also been argued that they had reason to believe that McEnany and Reichman had enough time to leave the bar to carry out the murder and robbery before then returning, and this was supported by alleged eyewitness accounts. But McEnany denied having ever left the bar at that night before leaving for good in the early hours of the morning, and it was even suggested that the eyewitnesses who had been employed in the bar and that had provided statements from that night had been influenced by the police to suggest that the pair had been seen leaving, as they had been threatened by the authorities with the knowledge that they had been serving someone underage that night, which was Reisman. The nature of the crime itself has been under much discussion by professionals over the years, as the attack on KATHRYN Bishop had been extremely brutal and often referred to as a rage killing. And this would beg the question as to what reason McEnany would have had to carry out this rage killing on an elderly woman who had simply employed him for a job. It has been suggested that brutal attacks such as these are more often likely to be carried out by someone who is very close or even related to the victim, as they're often seen as more personal. And this is just a connection that McEnany doesn't appear to have had with KATHRYN. There are a number of facts within the trial that raise a lot of questions in my mind, like the mention of the pair having gone to Atlantic City to spend the money that they had allegedly stolen after committing the crime. I couldn't find any solid evidence of this being proven or disputed, so I'm not entirely sure whether this was something inaccurately brought up in the trial and later discarded as evidence, or something else entirely, but it does stick out as a strange point to me. I also think that it's strange that the investigative journalist who had been featured on the Forensic Files episode covering the case had allegedly shared fake information revolving around the crime. I have seen some accusations that this was purposely orchestrated by the authorities as a means of supporting their case against McEnany and attempting to prove their case is stronger than it actually was. Also, interestingly, the specific sighting of a neighbour having seen a man with long hair running down the street after hearing a noise in the direction of KATHRYN Bishop's house was allegedly at the time linked to Reisman as having matched his description. But from what I've seen, this isn't actually the case, as the main detail they could distinguish from the sighting of the man had been his long hair, and yet both Reisman and McEnany had short hair. But interestingly, it was brought up in the post defending McEnany that KATHRYN Bishop's grandson did allegedly in fact matched the description of this man. Following the trial, Timothy McEnany had been sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As I said, this case is definitely a controversial one, as there are many people who do genuinely believe he is responsible for the murder, while others argue the complete opposite. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, as like I said, I think a lot of the arguments within this case seem to be based on hearsay or eyewitness statements and not a lot of solid evidence, or at least there is just a significant amount of reasonable doubt that could be applied. As always, please do be respectful of other people's opinions in the comments, and if you would like to read more into the posts that I've mentioned from the Pennsylvania Justice Project's argument in favour of Timothy McEnany's innocence, I will leave a link to that website down below. And that is where I'm going to leave today's video. I hope you guys found this interesting, and I will see you guys tomorrow for another instalment of True Crime Week. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.